are getting so bad. Okay, are we ready to start here? Yeah. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I believe we are already live on Facebook. So for all the millions of people, all the millions of viewers out there, welcome to everyone. My name is Assemblymember Muratsuchi, and I have the privilege of representing South Bay of Los Angeles. We are so excited to be here for our town hall with the theme of fighting air pollution together. We have such great leaders in the fight against air pollution throughout the state here, state as well as local here in the South Bay, as well as folks in the audience who are concerned about the air pollution in the South Bay. And so welcome everyone, and thank you for being here. I want to give special thanks to Dr. Dina Maloney and Andrea Salas with the El Camino College for hosting today's town hall and for letting us use your wonderful facility here today. So last year, the legislature passed two bills, AB 617 and AB 1647, which provide new requirements for air quality standards in California. I was honored to author 1647 and to co-author AB 617. Our panelists here today with the California Air Resources Board, the Southern California Air Quality Management District, and our local leaders will be talking about their fight and how we can work together, how local community activists can work with the ARB and the AQMD on monitoring and fighting for better air quality in the South Bay and throughout the state of California. A few housekeeping items. We will have panel number one with the speakers from the ARB, and then panel two with Dr. Fine from the AQMD and some of our local leaders in the fight against air pollution. The microphones are all set up here, and we will have, let's see, a microphone for questions. No, okay, all right, yeah, all right. So we will have folks give you an opportunity to ask any questions, and we're hoping that we can engage in a good conversation here today. Given that we have a nice, intimate gathering here today. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first panel. We have Karen Magliano, the Director of the Office of Community Air Protection, the California Air Resources Board, and Veronica Eady, the Assistant Executive Officer for Environmental Justice, also with the California Air Resources Board, who will be discussing what the public goals of air quality monitoring and community emissions reduction programs are and what we're hoping to achieve with this particular program. So Ms. Magliano, Ms. Eady, thank you very much for being here. All of our folks from the ARB came all the way down from Sacramento to join us here today. So thank you very much for being here.
Do we have slides set up? Or? Okay.
Okay.
Thanks. Live, or do I need to turn this on? It's on. Okay. It's a small room, so I think hopefully everyone can hear me easily as well. As I said, I'm Karen Magliano, and I'm the director of our new Office of Community Air Protection at CARB. And as you heard from the Assembly member, this is brand new legislation. And the motivation for the legislation was a recognition that while we've made significant progress in California in reducing air pollution, there are still communities that have much higher impacts than others. And so these are communities that really need to be a focus of extra action and our efforts going forward. So, key effort of this really is that word action. What we're looking at here is going into these communities and really prioritizing actions to reduce emissions, reduce exposure to air pollution within those communities, particularly disadvantaged communities that tend to have experienced impacts from multiple different air pollution sources. And ultimately, we're doing this because it's about improving public health within these communities. One of the other topics we'll be talking about today is the role of air monitoring in helping to support those efforts. And we're now at a point where we're able to collect much better data within communities themselves to really understand what are those community level impacts and how can that inform how we take better action to reduce emissions and exposure and public health within those communities themselves. And then the last thing that's really a core essence of the legislation is that this is a partnership amongst all of us in this room in terms of going into communities and really working through what those solutions need to be. So there are a lot of different elements of the legislation that are really designed to work together to be able to support those actions themselves. At part of it are community emission reduction programs. And so these are programs that are tailored to the individual issues and concerns within those communities, but really identifying actions that can address the pollution sources within those communities themselves and looking at ways we can accelerate and implement those kinds of rules and regulations. The other key elements of it, as I mentioned, it's doing additional monitoring within communities to better understand what's going on, but also making that data more readily accessible and interpretable so everybody can use that to help advocate for cleaner air within the community itself. Another element are increased penalty provisions for when there are violations of air pollution rules. These are fines that had not been increased in decades, and so this provides an additional deterrent within the community. And the last piece is, going back to that strong community partnership approach. The legislature has allocated funding for grants to go to local community groups so that they can help participate in the process, and Veronica will be talking about that a little more as well. So what's going on? As I said, there's a lot of different moving parts of the legislation itself. But in terms of what's going on right now, one of the first pieces is to really identify what those communities are that have the largest impacts within California. And then start looking at which communities, do we start with. We know that there's a large number of communities throughout the state that need that extra attention. That's something we're going to have to build up to over time. And so part of the process now is looking at, what a suite of communities have a range of different air pollution problems that we can start addressing right now. But at the same time, identify regulations and other programs that really can help all highly impacted communities throughout the state. The other piece of it is what CARB is specifically tasked with, and that is sort of laying out the broad benchmarks and criteria to what do these programs need to look like so that we ensure no matter which community we go into, there's that sort of consistent level of rigor and quality in terms of whether the monitoring or the emission reduction programs are developed. And as you see as we go through this, and the reason why both CARB and the Air District are here, there are roles and responsibilities for both of our agencies, and it's very much a partnership between our agencies working with the communities in implementing the program. There's also, as I mentioned, funding that's being provided both to invest in cleaner technologies, in mobile sources, cars and trucks and buses within communities, again, so we can start seeing immediate reductions in air pollution within those communities. And then there's also grants to local communities themselves. So I'm going to hand it over to Veronica now to kind of talk a little bit about what happens going forward, and then, of course, Dr. Fine will be talking about how the air districts then work in this framework.
So once again, I'm Veronica Edie, and I head up Resources Board, so working in and with a lot of local communities, very much like this one. I'm just going to do a few slides here. The first slide talks about this $5 million that Karen mentioned. This is a pot of money that the legislature allocated to the Air Resources Board so that we could set up a grant program to support local communities as they participate in the implementation of AB 617. As Karen said, AB 617 is really all about really creating and building strong partnerships. So there are partnerships between AirB and the local air districts, but the community partnership is also a really vitally important part of this program, and that's why the legislature sought to allocate this $5 million. While Karen and I are in our offices and Dr. Klein is in his office doing our work to implement this law, this $5 million supports the communities do their part and creates a real synergy. The $5 million right now is in an open solicitation, so we sent out a grant announcement. This solicitation and grant applications will be accepted until April 19th, so that's a week from tonight. Should be in the mail by close of business. If you go to our website, there's a lot of information about. Thank you. Sorry about that. If you go to our website, there's a lot of information about the sorts of activities that this grant program will cover. But briefly on this slide, in terms of participating in the process, it can fund arranging community meetings, much like this one, to invite residents to come in and learn about AB 617 and the opportunities under it. It can support developing materials that might be distributed, hiring technical consultants, scientists, and other experts who can help interpret the data that's collected through the implementation of AB 197. And it can also, 617. And it can also actually support deploying air monitoring, local community air monitoring networks themselves. And I certainly expect us to see a whole range of projects. But I can't stress enough how important this $5 million is, and I'm really excited over the course of next year as that money gets doled out to communities to see what communities are able to produce and move us forward in achieving the goals of the law. So, speaking of community participation, there are many ways for communities to be involved, but this highlights three really important things that are upcoming. One is the nomination of communities. So Karen talked about prioritizing the most the communities with the highest exposure burden in the state, air pollution burden in the state. We're in the process of doing that, and there are two ways that a community can end up on the priority list. One way is for the air district, which has, of course, a lot of local data to analyze and take advantage of. The air districts will most certainly come up with a list that they'll submit to us of the communities in their region that they think are the highest priority. But in the interest of transparency and really respecting the innate knowledge of local communities, we also are accepting nominations from community members themselves. And again, the information on how to do this is on our website, but it's fairly simple for a community to self-nominate it. The nomination period will continue through probably June, at which point we're going to be starting to analyze the data and prepare for the final list, which we'll announce at our board meeting at the end of September. However, there's not really an end date for communities to be nominated. If you decide after June, if you decide in September or December that you think that your community should be on that list, we're keeping kind of a dynamic master list. So the list that we come out with in July or August is going to include communities that we're going to focus on for the first year across the state. But there's year 2, year 3, and ongoing. So it's really important that communities that think that they should be on the list let us know, and there is no, there's an immediate deadline, but we're always accepting nominations. The next bubble is to help us design program, and that's just having conversations with us like the conversation we're having right now, giving us input on the documents that we've produced to help put this program together. And you'll find on our website, at the end of this presentation, you'll get our web address, but you'll find on our website that right now we have a concept paper, and the concept paper outlines what we think initially the program should look like. We're taking comments from communities, and it's really important that you let us know what works in your community and what doesn't work in your community, or how you think your community should be defined. We're taking comments on that. We'll have another draft document based on comments that we get coming out in late May, and ultimately we'll have a final document in August, and then we'll go to our board at the end of September. Anytime in those several months, there are copious opportunities for you to comment on our documents, contact us, ask us to come meet in your community. We're really open to however you want to engage, whatever method works for you and for your community. And finally, Karen mentioned funding for cleaner trucks and buses and technology. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that because that program is administered through the Air District, and I'm assuming, Dr. Fine, that you touch on that. And they have their own method for how they identify projects that can be funded through this cleaner technology incentive funding. So this just lays out some of the deadlines coming up over the course of the next year plus. As I said, in September, at the end of the month, we're going to be going to our board with laying out kind of the blueprint for how the AB 617 will be implemented. Once we lay out that blueprint, then a lot of activity shifts to the air districts, and you'll see that in January 19, the air districts are going to adopt their schedule for pollution, technology, and retrofits that need to be made as part of implementing the law. July of next year will be the community air monitoring that the air districts will be undertaking, and I'm sure that Dr. Fine will talk a little bit about that. And then finally in October of next year, the districts will start to implement the emissions reduction programs that are put together for communities that are prioritized for emission reductions. This next slide, I am going to ask my colleague to discuss. Catherine Dunwoody is the chief of our monitoring and laboratory division, and they head up all of monitoring and within CARB, and she is more fluent in this slide.
Happy to do that, Veronica. And so what I'm going to do is talk a little bit about air monitoring under the two bills that Assemblymember Muratsuchi mentioned, one of which he authored, and that is AB 1647 and then, of course, AB 617 that we've been hearing about here. So both bills have elements of air monitoring. 1647 is really focused on air monitoring, whereas air monitoring is one element within AB 617. So there's some very clear similarities and some very clear differences. They both, as I mentioned, have air monitoring elements, but AB 1647 is specifically focused on refinery communities. And so while a refinery community may or may not be identified under AB 617, it will be subject to the requirements in 1647. So both of these bills do require community air monitoring, and in both cases that community air monitoring is really under the purview of the local air district. There are some requirements as well in both bills for fence line monitoring. In the case of AB 617, it's a statement in the bill that authorizes the air districts to require fence line monitoring, and that fence line monitoring could apply to any type of source within the identified community. Under 1647, it actually requires the refineries to install fence line monitoring. So, the way I look at it is that what 1647 does is basically kind of guarantees that refineries are going to get these systems, either both fence line and community air monitoring, whereas 617 is broader and it will cover many more types of communities, and it may or may not include, especially in the first year, maybe over time it will include all refinery communities, but 617 also some of the deadlines are earlier. You heard mentioned for the first years the community air monitoring is to begin in July of 2019. Under AB 1647, it's to begin in January of 2020. So just a little bit later. Does that cover it? Okay.
Perfect.
Thanks.
And the final slide is where to get more information. So I mentioned that. I mentioned that there's a lot of information on our website. That's arb.ca.gov. If you go to our website, you'll find, and if you picked up a copy of this presentation, you'll have all this information on it as well. If you go to arb.ca.gov and you can scroll down and click on either environmental justice or air monitoring, both of those will take you to the Community Air Protection Program page that has all of the documents that I mentioned. There are also 2 email addresses where you can submit comments, questions, anything else that you'd like to comment on. That's in English, communityair@arb.ca.gov, and in Spanish, airecomunitario@arb.ca.gov. And also at this website, you can click to subscribe to our listserv, and you'll get regular updates of what's going on and where we are in the implementation of the law.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. We were going to break it up into 2 panels, but I think it makes sense if we just heard from all of our speakers, and then we can have the audience participate with any questions and have a conversation to bring the statewide implementation of these important new laws with our local perspective, what is going on not only with the Air Quality Management District in Southern California, but also more specifically what's going on in the South Bay. And so I would like to thank our speakers from CARB and then proceed with the second half of our presentation, which is the implementation of these laws at the local level, what local jurisdictions are doing, and what we can do as part of the South Bay community to fight against air pollution. So we are honored to be joined and to hear and to learn from Dr. Philip Fine from the South Coast Air Quality Management District, Jesse Marquez, the Executive Director of the Wilmington-based Coalition for a Safe Environment, and Catherine Lays with the South Bay Families Lobbying Against Refinery Emissions. Now, I want to give a special plug to Catherine, because it was really the leadership of 2 moms in Torrance that really started much of the air pollution fight, specifically around the Torrance refinery. Catherine and her partner, partner in her great work, Maureen Mock, who is getting her PhD in Wisconsin now, but we hope that she'll be coming back to the South Bay. But, it was basically 2 mothers that lived near the Torrance refinery that were concerned about the frequent and excessive flaring that has been taking place at the Torrance refinery, and they decided that they were going to do something about it to protect their kids. And so they formed this organization, and I think that's just Catherine. Jesse, I know you've been doing a lot of great work too, and I look forward to hearing your work also. But it's Both Catherine and Jesse are great examples of how, citizens in our community can really step up and become leaders in the fight against air pollution. And so, without any further ado, let's start with Dr. Fine with the AQMB. And you have a video that you wanted to present at this time?
We can show the video now to you, or I can go into the presentation.
Whichever you prefer.
Why don't we do the video? Just
Okay.
Make it up.
All right.
I spent 50 years of my life with heavyweight champion of the world. Everywhere we went, everybody wanted to touch him and talk to him. While the president of the United States or the president of Russia was trying to get his attention, he was picking up a baby or a young person and touching them and talking to them and empathizing with them. That's what made him a great champion. Environmental justice is the same exact thing. You have to take care of the people who don't have the power to take care of themselves. You have to represent them in halls that they sometimes are not represented in. Because if you don't do that, you're not really on a life mission that is worthwhile. When we think about health, there are things that we can control, and there are things that we cannot control. We can change our diet, we can exercise more, but you cannot change the air that you breathe. I began to experience a breathing problem. It got so bad that going from my bed to the bathroom was a 2-stop trip. That gave me a first-hand experience with what it's like to have asthma or some other respiratory disorder caused by air pollution.
I grew up in this area, and so as a small child, I remember when, if we were playing We Could Not Breathe, you would clutch your side, you would try to catch breath. You know, a terrible feeling.
I was diagnosed with severe asthma and been hospitalized or admitted to the emergency room. So many times I've lost count.
Todos nosotros en esta familia tenemos problemas de salud, especialmente problemas respiratorios. Todos tenemos asma y es muy frustrante para mí como madre no poder ayudar bien. Tantos vecinos que ya hemos despedido, que han sido impactados por el cáncer. My biggest fear is that I get cancer and I wouldn't be able to see my kids, my children's kids.
I think a lot of people accept it as one of the grim realities of living in Los Angeles. I had a husband die of pulmonary fibrosis, and that's a very personal experience with the difficulty to breathe.
When you can't breathe, when you're having trouble breathing, everything else becomes secondary. All you can think about is breathing.
At one of our meetings in the community, an elderly woman stepped to the microphone, and she just read 40 names. And she said, those are the people in my community that have passed away in the last several years of cancer. And where were you? We're working as hard as we can so that there aren't more names added to that list. The biggest challenge that we have, frankly, is from mobile sources, planes, trains, trucks.
Some of our early findings suggest that even short-term exposure to the type of pollution that we find along busy freeways can activate genes in the brain that are genes that we associate with cancer.
In Southern California, the air pollution's improved dramatically. You can now see the mountains, but people notice what you don't see hurts you.
There is preliminary proof that when a pregnant woman breathes, the PM particles that are microscopic transmit through her bloodstream to the fetus, causing possible brain damage. That's scary stuff. Can't let that happen.
Last summer, there were so many unhelpful aired. It's just a string in a row. I was staying at home trying to protect my airways, and I still got really sick, and I ended up hospitalized for 3 days.
Sometimes people say, well, it used to be so much worse, now isn't it good enough? But when people are still struggling like my mom is, when we still have some of the worst air quality in the nation, and when people are dying because of the poor air quality, it's not good enough yet.
Once you realize the impact of these mobile sources, if they're not electric, they're emitting toxic gases. You just can't sit there idle. You've got to take action.
My husband and my 2 kids, they're 4 and 6, we moved to Torrance about 5 years ago. About a year after we moved to our house here, a nearby refinery was having a lot of flaring events. And I started to notice that there was black dust on my car in the windowsill, and I was just puzzled by it. I kind of started paying more attention and realizing that the dust was coming at the same time of the flaring, and the kids were coughing more often, and when they would get sick, we'd have to have inhalers prescribed to us. My kids were actually at the park at 8:30 in the morning, and all of a sudden, we just started seeing this ash raining down, and the kids said it was snowing. So we came home and we found out that the refinery had exploded, and that it was actually industrial ash raining down on us from a mile away.
There's a number of people now who say, what are you doing? The air's okay, but it's not fine for everybody.
You would never see a freeway go through a very wealthy area, but the freeways are situated in low-income areas. We have kids that live literally steps from a 12-lane highway.
I believe clean air is a right. It's not a privilege. It's towards the hills. And we're like, oh wow, like we're in freeways, we're in factories, now because that was a norm to us, and that should be the norm to us. It shouldn't matter where we come from, we should have the same benefits as someone in a different community.
We shouldn't have to choose between jobs and our environment.
I know that the economy has got to be considered. And I know that you got to put people before economy. So it's just a horrific balance. And we're continuing trying to work on that.
We know there's technologies available that can help us get to our clean air objectives. We know technology works. We have a shot at clean air if we can have both policy, technology, and incentives lined up. 10 years ago, there were no electric cars. There were no fuel cell cars. We're seeing that progression in the light-duty sector, and now we've got to transfer that into the medium and heavy-duty truck sector.
We need to work all together and be united in saying that clean air is something we really value and want to work together to change.
I see the first time an opportunity for helping communities understand the impact of environmental injustice, and then help communities understand they have a civil right to quality air, a civil right to have an environment free of pollutants.
All of us have an obligation. We're all stewards of this beautiful earth. Having your life and your daily lifestyle, you need to drive your car to work. Is there a train or a bus nearby? Maybe if you can't take it every day, take it once a week.
The more that we can educate the community, especially communities that don't have access to resources, I think that we can impact personal behavior.
Everybody has a right to breathe clean air. Everybody has a right to participate in a decision-making process.
Your voice does matter. Your voice could make the change to not only yourself, but to the people around you.
The people in the senior citizen homes have a role. The everyday worker has a role. And the children definitely have a role. This is everybody's endeavor. And you gotta get us all involved.
So, can everyone hear me? I hope everyone enjoyed the video. I hope it was informative. It's a hard act to follow. And thanks for our fellow panelists for being a part of that. It's actually, this is a shortened version. If you're interested, I think there's a longer version you can still find online. It's almost 30 minutes long. So yeah, you can see that across the basin we have a lot of air quality challenges. And traditionally, local air districts have focused more on what we call regional pollution, that ozone and particulate matter that you saw in the video. These are pollutants that tend to be very regional. But we also know that there are specific neighborhoods, specific communities, specific blocks in neighborhoods that are impacted more than, say, a neighborhood that's only a mile or 2 miles away. So while the bills that are being discussed tonight really focus our efforts on that, we have been working in that area for some time. We've done monitoring work in Paramount, as you may have heard, or Compton. We're embarking on monitoring work in Torrance right now that's independent, or what's happening before these bills were passed. And we've done it in numerous communities throughout the area. We have our toxic studies that we do from time to time. But what these bills do is they really highlight the need, and they actually mandate the work that's going to be done in these communities, and it really puts it on steroids. It's really going to really expand our efforts in that area. So to date, we really just have done it kind of on a as resources allow, or as big issues come up, like explosion in Torrance, or when we found the hexavalent chromium in Paramount. And now we're going to be a little more proactive, identify communities that go in there before we have these types of, hair-on-fire type emergencies, which is something that the local air districts support fully. So my presentation has a lot of overlap with Karen's presentation, and that might show a lack of coordination, but I assure you it was only a lack of coordination over the last few hours. It also shows a lot of coordination because of that overlap. What you're going to see in my presentation and what Karen showed is very similar, because we've been working hand in hand over the last 4, 5, 6 months to put together a program that's going to work for everyone. And there's rules at the state level, there's rules at the local level, and we're just trying to fit all those pieces together in a way that works. So Karen touched on a lot of this, as I said. I'm going to go pretty quickly through some of these where there is that overlap. But from a local air district perspective, sorry, thing over a colon. There's really these kind of 5 main elements that need to be implemented at the local level. And the probably centerpiece of that, as Karen mentioned, is these community emission reduction plans. What everyone wants, they don't want to just know what's affecting them or where it's coming from or how much it's affecting them. They want that situation improved. So part of the AB 617 is to implement those those community emission reduction plans. Now, to support that, there's a lot of other elements of AB 617, which is community air monitoring, which may diagnose problems or helps know where the sources are, and they can also help us track progress. Once we implement emission reduction strategies, they will help show that we've actually achieved the results that we thought we were going to achieve by showing that the levels are actually coming down. There's other elements as well in terms of emissions reporting and easier access to emissions data, and Karen also mentioned the requirement for best available controls, which are hard at work right now, amending about a dozen rules that we're trying to get done by the end of this year, which is very challenging, to put all these facilities on a schedule to make sure that they are implementing those best emission controls, which will get emission benefits in those communities as well as regionally. And then the last piece, and can also touch on this, is these clean technology investments. There's considerable resources being put towards changing out the dirtiest equipment, primarily getting rid of diesel, mobile source diesel emissions, and replacing it with either zero emission or very close to zero emission equipment. And that's what we know will give the best reduction in toxic risk in our area based on all the studies we've done to date. What the local districts are working on now, and Karen mentioned this, is this first step of identifying communities and then moving on into prioritizing communities. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But as a centerpiece of the program is, what are we going to do? What are we going to do to actually improve public health and get these emission reductions? And there's a lot of different areas that could be explored, and it's really going to depend on the community, depend on the different sources in the community, depend on what is really driving exposure in that community, and also what authorities we have at the local level bring about that change at the state level. So it's going to really be tailored to that individual community and individual needs, and it's going to be a bottoms-up approach that really listens and takes into account what the community wants to get out of the program. So one potential way to get these reductions is, again, regulatory actions. The local air districts have authority over stationary sources, and some limited authority over mobile sources, and the State Air Resources Board has primary authority over most of the mobile sources, and the EPA has the rest of that authority over the other mobile sources. And then there's local jurisdictions that have land use authority. There are transportation agencies that have other authorities and other decisions that can make. So part of the program is really partnering with all the agencies and all stakeholders to bring about that change in the community, these communities that the communities are asking for. As we know, regulation moves at a very slow pace, and it takes time for technology to perhaps catch up, or the cost of the technology to catch up. So a big part of this is incentive funding and the investments in clean technology I mentioned, where we can help those small business owners change out the equipment and lower their emissions that would otherwise be unaffordable or would take way too long to wait for regulation to catch up to the technology. So again, there's other things we can do with other agencies. Truck routes, in terms of where heavy-duty diesel trucks are being routed through communities, is something we've heard a lot from communities. We don't have authority over that, but again, local jurisdictions do. Other types of actions are listed here. A lot of the efforts could just be a lot of education of the community members who may not know about air pollution, may not know what the risks are, and may not know what the sources are. But once they know, they can take that information and turn it into action through advocacy with us, with the state, with local cities and counties and other agencies as well. And then there may be some other actions we can take that may not be specific, like taking emissions down, but can help protect and help the health of the community. We've done a lot of work with putting high-efficiency filtration into schools. There's a lot of talk about moving facilities or making buffers between emissions and where people live and work. And then vegetation can have some benefits if it's done in the right way. So there's a lot of different strategies that can come in to once we engage in these communities. So what are we doing now? What have we done thus far? We've held 4 community outreach meetings to get feedback on which communities should be prioritized, to identify communities, what factors we should be looking at. We have a meeting scheduled on Tuesday of next week in Orange County. And that hasn't been it. We've been all CARBS meetings. We have been going out to other agencies, coalitions of government, transportation agencies, any organization that wants us to come and talk about this program. We're happy to come and talk to you at your regularly scheduled meetings, special meetings, so just let us know. And again, I mentioned the technical work that is being done in the background in terms of the data sets that we have and all coordination work we're doing with CARB. I went into some of this already. So again, this available control technology requirements. Enforcement can be a big part of this. Targeted enforcement efforts in the communities that need it most. We heard about the increase in civil penalties. That can have an effect. And again, rule development as needed. So a part of this is funding. And we need funding to not just for districts to implement the program, but even more important, funding for these incentive programs to help get these dirty equipment out of these communities as quickly as possible. So last year, as part of the cap and trade legislation that went through in Sacramento, and AB 617 was a companion bill to that, a trailer bill actually gave $250 million statewide for these incentive programs. And the South Coast received about $107 million of that, which about doubled our incentive program. So that we're working on that right now. Part of our outreach is to get feedback on how that money should be spent, what types of projects, where it should be spent, and there's an open solicitation now for like truck owners or fleet owners or construction equipment owners who want to be able to take advantage of these incentives so the cleaner technology is a little more affordable. And Veronica mentioned the $5 million statewide for the community era grants, which is also important. What we got last year was only 1 year of funding, so we need continued funding, and that's still an open question in this year's state budget that we hope will get resolved very soon. So what can you do in terms of working with us? Veronica mentioned and Karen mentioned that there is a way for communities to recommend that they be part of this program directly to CARB. They can also do that directly to us, and we will integrate your comments, your suggestions into our analysis and our suggestions to CARB as we go forward. And you could do both. You could then independently CARB, and you could talk to us. We're not going to, our ultimate recommendations are obviously not going to make every community happy. We cannot do the 50 to 60 communities that we want to at least assess in Southern California in the first year. It's just not possible. So we need to prioritize and roll this out in a reasonable manner. But some people are going to be lower on that list, and they're not going to like where they come out. So it's okay to make comments to us on that. Our board's going to decide what goes to CARB, and then CARB's board is going to decide at some point what that final list is. And that's really the final list for just year one. And then every year this is going to come back, and the priorities are going to get adjusted, and new communities can be added, and it's an ongoing rolling process. So to work with us, you can go to our website at www.aqmd.gov/8617. We have a web form you'd fill out if you wanted to nominate your community. It's not necessary to have a community nomination to be considered. We are also doing our own work to try to identify communities, but it does help get that information from the public. You could send us letters. You could use this form. You could contact me. You could email this ab617@aqmd.gov. There's a lot of ways to reach us, and it's not just about identifying your community or some other community as needing a high priority. If you have comments on how we're going about the process, what factors we should be looking at, that's the kind of input we're looking for and have received in our community meetings. We have a soft kind of deadline by May 7th, so we can integrate all that input into what's going to be a report that goes through our board CARB on our recommendations. Aaron mentioned by the end of April we're going to give them a preliminary list, but that list is subject to change based on the input we receive. So again, there's a website you can go to, and I don't want to take too much of your time, but this is a very, very important program for us. Along with AB 1647, there is overlap, as you heard, and so we will be, not all communities that have refineries are going to get highly prioritized in AB 617, and not all communities that are going to get highly prioritized have refineries, and not everything in those communities with refineries, not all the pollution is coming from the refineries. So there's considerable overlap. We're working very hard to make that a smooth overlap and make sure the two programs complement and supplement each other without any conflicts. And although the deadlines are slightly off, we think we can make it work. Obviously, Torrance, because of, again, the refinery explosion in 2015, is already going to get air monitoring through some penalty funds that we have, and that will likely occur prior to these deadlines. And then ongoing, under 1647, there will be ongoing fence line monitoring and ongoing community monitoring, and that will help some of our AB 617 implementation as well. So with that, all right, panelists.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fine. You know, before we next hear from Jesse Marquez for the Coalition for a Safe Environment, I just want to get a sense, how many folks here are from Torrance? Okay. Harbor City, Harbor Gateway, Beach Cities, Palos Verdes? Okay. All right. So I think we have a pretty good sense. Any other neighborhoods that I didn't cover in the South Bay area? I know we have folks from further out, but okay, so that gives us a better sense of what your perspective is and where your concerns may be. Also, before I go any further, I should have introduced from the beginning, but we have Torrance Deputy Chief Dumays joining us here. The Torrance Fire Department is our local. Thank you very much for joining us, sir. As many of us know, the Torrance Fire Department is our local first responder that is in charge of, among other things, the community alert system, as well as the first responders in the case of any emergency at the Torrance Finery. So thank you very much for joining us. Without further ado, Jesse Marquez, please share with us your work.
Thank you, Assemblymember, staff, and everyone else for inviting me to participate with you. I feel a very unique little role here in that I am a resident. And as a resident, I started a nonprofit organization, a Coalition for a Safe Environment, in 2001 to fight industry's air pollution that was causing public health impacts and public safety impacts. And so you know where I'm coming from. In 2001, I had zero experience in air quality. Okay? I was never part of any major organization dealing with the environment. I have no AA, no bachelor's, no master's, no PhD. I'm not an attorney, never went to law school, but then those that know me already, I can fill a lot of those shoes very well. So at an organization in Wilmington, we have 3 oil refineries in Wilmington, one that borders us in Carson. We have the largest port in the United States bordering in Wilmington, and the port of Long Beach there. We have the Alameda Corridor. So we're a good little example of the worst case scenario. And over 16 years, you'll find out that, if you had met me then, our IQ was about this big, and now we've learned like this much. And the best thing about being a veteran of all this experience is that when I meet new people, new organizations, new communities, I can share all that wealth of information so that it's not going to take you 15, 16 years to learn it. We were also one of the first ones in the process to understand what reality is. And reality is that there were air quality standards, both federal ones, state ones, local ones. We found out that, there's different types of equipment that are used to measure different types of chemicals out there. And one time in 2002 or so, I was at a committee meeting, and someone was poking me on the side and said, Mr. Marquez, ask the Port of LA about MATES 2 study. I had no clue what that was. And so I raised my hand and says, I'd like to ask you about the MATES 2 study. And they said, well, it's not a study that we, the ports, did. It was actually one done by the South Coast AQMD. So I told them, well, is there anything important about that study that, you share with us? Well, yes. Wilmington, West Long Beach, and San Pedro were at the highest risk of lung cancer from diesel exhaust. So diesel exhaust from the ships, from the trains, from the trucks, operating equipment. And this study had already been out a whole year, and we never knew anything about it. And so then there was another port meeting, and they said, and it was a PR firm for the Port of LA again, and they were going to build a wall in Wilmington to separate, the southern border of the port with the community. So I attended that meeting to find out why, because sometimes you attend a meeting and you're going there for a wall, and it turns out it's something completely different. Well, they were going to build a wall, but then having been an activist, I raised my hand. By the way, do you have anything, any intentions of building anything on the other side of that wall in the next 5, 10 years? And that's when the scary answer came back. Yes, we're going to build a 6-lane diesel truck highway that'll connect the Harbor Freeway and eventually with the Long Beach Freeway. We're going to move that port railroad track further north in Wilmington, and the trade pack container terminal that borders Wilmington is going to move closer to Wilmington. And then all of you have all heard the expression, hell over my dead body. Well, I invoked that that day, that evening, and said, anyone wants to come to my house this Saturday, we'll go in my backyard under our avocado tree and we'll talk about it. And I had over 30 people show up. At that time, we just formed a little committee to look into it, And just to show you, this is 2001, not too long ago. And a friend that told me about the Mason study said, well, you had to go online. Well, nowadays we have desktops, laptops, tablets, but if you go back to 2001, only a handful of people actually had a computer in 2001, to show you how things changed. Well, I had worked on a computer, but I'd never been on the internet. I had 2 sons in high school, and I was divorced, so I called them up saying in Spanish, if your son or kids is, mijo, I need help, I need to get on the internet. And so, again, this is where you have your older generation talking to the younger generation, because sometimes our youth are the future, and they're learning things that I didn't know. I need to get on the internet. Well, Dad, you need a computer. Do you have a computer? No. Does anyone in the family have a computer? I don't think so. Well, eventually I found out a cousin did. Okay. I call up cousin. You have a computer? Yep. You have the internet? No. I just use it for typing, for college work. Oh, okay. Do you mind if I put the internet on it? So then I call up my sons. Okay, what do I do now? Well, let's go to Radio Shack, get a CD, we'll put it in there, we'll get on the internet, then you can do searches. So that's how I started learning about, okay, what is air pollution? And my sons laughed at me. What do you want to learn, Dad? Type in air pollution. So I typed in air pollution. Now, everyone that's been on the computer, you'll get 1 million hits. So it took a while to learn things. So I started learning there was different kinds of pollution. Now I know there's PM from exhaust that you see from the black smoke from trucks and trains. I learned about that. But then we had another concern too, because we knew a lot of people that had cancer, like leukemia, lymphoma, and things like that. And then I found, well, that's different. Those come from benzene and VOCs and things of that nature. And then we're realizing, well, there's hundreds of chemicals out there. And then, we actually put together a health survey. We asked USC, we asked UCLA, we asked Harvard College, can you help us do a public health survey so we get a better idea of the health problems? Because if we can understand the health problems, that might help us understand the air pollution, then how can we reduce air pollution? Well, no one wanted to help us because we had no scientists on staff. We were just a little committee. But we did it anyways. We got questions, we went out there. Believe it or not, over 600 Wilmington and South Carson residents participated in a survey of over 40 questions. It took 20 to 30 minutes to do each one of them. But one thing we focused on was leukemia. Now, we asked about asthma and all that stuff too, and we identified like 21 symptoms of leukemia and lymphoma and myeloma. And when we got all the results back, we were kind of shocked as to, we had residents who had like 17, 18 symptoms and hadn't been diagnosed with lymphoma or myeloma or leukemia. So we're in a state of shock, because now years are passing. We're going to attend all these public hearings. We're learning about government agencies. I'm starting to go to AQMD meetings, ARB meetings, California Air Resources meetings. Any meeting we were attending now, learning about them. And then, as we started learning, we realized, there is standards. AQMD issued permits. Like a refinery, that's called a Title V permit, and they have all these rules that regulate different equipment and different processes. And then USDA in Washington has their rules and stuff like that. And then we said, what? We have to learn about how to do some of this monitoring too. Is there anything? So we started looking into equipment, and then as we realized, well, wait a minute, some of this stuff is expensive. We can't afford, $100,000, $200,000. Some of the stuff. Is there anything low cost? Well, in the last 5-7 years, there have been nonprofit organizations, universities, and groups that have grouped together to create low-cost monitors. So out there right now, there's about, I'd say about 15 of them out there that would be under $1,000. I actually brought 2 of them. The little one over here to your left is called a Purple Air. It measures PM, particulate matter, which is your exhaust. This other one is in a big box, but actually it's that little small black unit inside the big box because it wasn't made to be put outside. Okay, so we put it in a big box. So there's about 100 Purple Airs throughout the United States up and running right now with different people and organizations. There's a group out of Central Valley that created this one using a Dylos monitor, and they put it in the box, and they got a $2 million grant, and they got 40 of them up and running. Our organization's claim to fame is in 2014, we wanted to do something too. We found a different manufacturer which had a PM monitor, VOC, NOx, SOx, temperature and humidity, and even noise. And we got it for $600. So what we did is that we got some grants. We got one from DTSC to actually purchase it. and then CARB and EPA gave us money to actually install it and get it up and running, that type of nature. So we had our initiation of that day where an open house, we had every government regulatory agency to see it, and we put it up on top of the roof of one Wilmington resident's house across on the other side of the fence line to the ConocoPhillips oil refinery. Now, AB 617 is a great opportunity, but it's also a big challenge. Because yes, the great things about it is there's 3 categories, the $50,000 category, $150,000, up to $500,000 category. So if you're a beginning organization, then you can, and you just want to do the basic workshop and education, invite some speakers, then you can apply for a few thousand to do that. If you want to do a little bit more, series of workshops and panels and stuff like that, then you can apply for the bigger one. If you've already done some monitoring and now you want to expand or add new types of equipment, it allows you to do that as well. But AB 617 is not just a community fence line monitoring bill. There are other 2 requirements. Those are the challenging ones because it says that it must also reduce emissions. It must also improve public health. Well, big industries already pollute and they report annually, so we know there's emissions out there. So what role does a little community-based one using low-cost monitors? Because if you're going to use a low-cost sensor, a low-cost monitor, or a low-cost instrument, naturally it can't compete with a $50,000, $200,000 piece of equipment. It can only give you basics. But then that's where a whole new world has evolved called community science, where residents for the first time, none of us are professors and PhDs and engineers. We are teaching ourselves the science of technologies, science of the atmosphere and chemicals in the air. We're learning about that, which is good. Because, see, when we understand that, then we can better address some of the bigger issues, the big health issues, okay, the big industry issues. So you can begin baby steps learning about it. Now, what was the first thing that we learned when we had our monitors going on? Well, we learned something that government agencies had to deal with. What happens when the monitor alarm goes off because you're exceeding something? What do? Well, our system was built up to notify people, hey, if you want a text message, we'll let you know that ozone went up, PM went up. So, what do? Well, AKMD's faced with that every day. What happens when it exceeds it? Well, they're not going to turn off a refinery because it does it. So then there's a reality too. What can be done? Well, then you have to look at the industry itself. What technologies can be used to reduce it? So the baby step is learning the science. What can you record? What kind of reports can you generate? Then how can you use it? Well, you can use it just like Flair did. You contact a candidate running for office. You contact elected officials saying, wait a minute, there's something wrong. Because, flaring is still happening. Because when you talk to industries like refiners, flaring is a safety precaution. If we didn't flare, potential for it exploding happens. So it's a safety precaution. But then when people like us from the residents start doing more research, we find out, well, wait a minute. There's a thing called a vapor recovery system. And if you connect it to whatever is having a malfunction, instead of burn those gases, it goes down this pipe into an empty storage tank, you recover it, and then you're not losing money. So then we start learning about technologies. So then we come back to our elected officials, come back to our area resource board and say, wait a minute, guys, how come the permits are not mandating that they use these things? So what happens, community-based monitoring teaches you to be an educated advocate so that, you can read the rules and regulations, we can read the standards, we can start to understand the permits so that to see that are they incorporating all the best technologies into those permits. And the rules, are the rules up to date with technologies? Right now, we're in a transition whereby new laws have now opened up the door for new emerging technologies to come forward. We know that there's electric trucks coming out. Well, right now, there are 5 electric trucks, and 3 more will be approved by the end of this year. So we're going to have at least 7 to 8 electric trucks that can haul freight. Now, some of them may not make the 300-mile mark yet, but by next year, they'll be able to go the long distance. But that doesn't mean they can't be used today, now, for local deliveries. So again, as we learn, We work with our elected officials. AB 617 was by Christina Garcia, an assembly member from the East LA area. She was an activist resident and realized, wait a minute, this is not good enough, ARB. This is not good enough, AQMD. We are still exposed to too much. We want citizens now, we want residents to be involved, so that now AB 617 requires a community plan to be written as to how and which industries are the worst in your community that you see need to be prioritized. So now every one of you in this room, meeting with AQMD and others, can now sit down and develop that plan. So you can write a grant to help you along that process. We'd even hire technical assistants, advisors, engineers to help you and help us with those plans so we can submit them. So you do prioritize what are the first industries you want to be looked at, like in the first couple of years versus those 3 to 5 years and those 10 years in the future. So the opportunities are excellent for that. And so after this meeting, if anyone wants to take a look at these, hold it in your hand. I have no problems with that, and we're willing to work with anybody. I already submitted a letter of support for a group up in Oakland who's putting together a statewide training seminar about 617. And so we support each other and what we do. So I thank you for this time.
All right, should I just take it away? Okay. So sorry, bear with me. I have a cold, the latest thing my kids gave me, so I'll try not to sneeze the microphone. But thank you so much, Assemblyman Muratsuchi and the California Resources Board and South Coast AQMD for all the work you've done on this, and Jesse, who I have seen in action for so long and has been doing this so much longer than me. So exciting to watch you speak. So I am one of the founders of Families Lobbying Against Refinery Exposures. Like he mentioned, it was founded by myself and Maureen Mock, just two moms that were concerned about particulate emissions after the refinery exploded and it was having a restart. So we were worried about all the PM2.5 that would be going in the air. And so we started a group to kind of just share information and kind of figure out what was going on, and it just sort of exploded into this grassroots group of 2,500 community members, lots of parents, particularly around Torrance area. So we've kind of done a lot of different things, but tonight I just want to talk about an air monitoring project that's going to be going into the Torrance area that Philip did talk about briefly. So when the refinery exploded in 2015, before they restarted in 2016, they had to pay a fine of, I think it was over $5 million, and then half of that money was put to a supplemental environmental project fund, an SEP fund, and then that was available to anyone surrounding the refinery. It didn't have to be Torrance to apply for a grant for a project that would improve community. It didn't have to be air monitoring. So our group always kind of felt like there was two main things missing. One, there's a lack of awareness and education. A lot of people kind of just didn't even really know what was going on with the refinery. Like, oh, so it's flaring and there's particulate blowing everywhere. Like, does that matter? My kid's playing soccer next door. Or people that were concerned, a lot of people didn't even know that the South Coast Air Quality Management District existed. Which I can believe, because before I got involved, I didn't even know that there's such a huge group, and I didn't even know what that was. So, and they didn't know that when they saw an issue, they could call them, and that there was some online monitoring that they could look at. So we wanted to kind of find a way to meet that deficit, and get people more aware of what the tools that they have, the dangers of flaring for people with respiratory weakness or the elderly or the young. And we also saw that there was kind of a lack of real-time air monitoring. So back when we kind of got involved, the only way that we saw that we could get a sense of what was going on when there was flaring was to call the South Coast Air Quality Management District, and then they could send an inspector out and they could take an air sample, and we could do a public information request for those results. So for us as moms, we were, it just made us feel kind of helpless, because we could just find out what was in the air later and kind of feel guilty for having our kids out at the park that day or something, but it didn't give us the opportunity to make decisions in that moment. So So anyway, back to the SEP project. So we wanted to see real-time air monitoring in Torrance. So we worked with kind of on the back end Sonoma Tech, SCI, which is a meteorology and monitoring company, to help kind of create a fence line and community monitoring and education projects. So as I mentioned, that'll be going in hopefully at the end of the year. I know it's kind of up in the air. It's not quite finalized with the contracts. Last time I talked to Sonoma Tech, but they did say it's fine to share kind of the basics of it. So the project will have real-time fence monitoring for HF, HCN, BTEX, PM 2.5, a number of other things. It'll have real-time monitoring in the community for the same compounds for 2 years. The exact locations haven't been settled. Ideally, like, we'd love to have some of those sites be schools. Obviously, that takes working with the school board, which is like a whole other thing to get involved with. So that hasn't been settled. Also have a real-time data and information website with the ability for people to sign up for alerts, plus a mobile app, so actually real-time data that's available in an easy way. Again, you can't sign up for this yet. So the idea that it's both, the fence line and the community monitoring, plus the website and the app, will be able to continue beyond the 2 years in some form or another to hopefully meet the South Coast Air Quality Management District's Rule 1180 or AB 16 or 617 objectives. So the project will also include a technical advisory committee with agency and community members to provide comments on the plan, so community engagement, which is great, and to provide comments on ongoing operations, the monitoring, and the website, so allowing people to comment on if it's effective, how it's working for them. Community engagement activities, which is really something that I've been passionate about. So meetings, discussions, kids making sense. It's a program that Sonoma Tech has done before with kids, and they kind of learn about the basics of sensors and what they mean, and then fixed site sensors in the community. So again, unfortunately, it's not supposed to go in until probably later 2018, maybe early 2019. I don't know. I know South Coast AQ is very, very busy, but we will definitely keep you up to date. I'm sure Al's team or our website, Flare. Well, we don't have a website. We have a Facebook page. We'll provide any detail once they're available. But the benefits to the community will be an opportunity to participate and contribute, an early warning system at the fence line, have real-time data. You don't have to, wait to kind of find out what's in the air. And you don't have to, for me, I was always like, well, the inspectors, they have to drive here. What if there was something going on and now it's not here and we still don't know what happened? But it'll be real time. It'll always be there. So education on the actual, concentrations in the community. And then one thing that Sonoma Tech did mention is they will have to kind of determine like the thresholds and what, is considered problematic in a community for short-term burst or chronic exposure and things like that. So that's another thing that has to kind of be figured out. So that's basically what I wanted to share. So that's pretty exciting. That will be going in soon. And then, of course, we have this legislation coming, which will help out the Torrance and surrounding areas. And we'll keep you up to date when you can sign up for it. Sorry, I don't have a place to tell you to sign up.
Okay.
That's it for me.
All right. Let's give everyone a round of applause. All right. We have such a great presentation from each and every panelist, and I want to open up to questions from the audience. Yes, sir.
My name is Peter Chan. I'm a good friend of Dr. Chu Liu and Dr. Chen. You probably know them all the time. My question is, the way I understand refinery as a monitoring and also activity to monitoring, I think monitoring the same criteria, the particle size, for example, PM 2.5 micron size, or how often you monitor, you continuous monitor, or every 5 minutes. So make sure the monitoring compare the apple and apple, not apple and orange, right? You have two sets of data, they talk to each other. And my another question is, in case the monitor there's something alarm, who is going to alarm? The AQMD will alarm the people, or the plant, the refinery will alarm people? Who has the power to alarm the people? Hey, we have violation. Of course, we have to verify that the violation is real. has the data put before me, right? Is the check, okay? And we were very lucky that 2015, there was a big explosion. The actual static perceptor, the side of trailer, landing, burning landing, and next to the modified HF tank. Very close call, very close call. I'm a firm believer of Murphy's Law. We have a guy working for me in Lee Murphy. I always tell you, hey, I believe Murphy's Law. So in case the temperature, the MF tank, I understand the HF needs to come out. Not the cover so I don't know what else can you do. You run like hell or so. I mean, I don't know. It's a tough question. What if the risk in case something happens, the tank is temperature, then what? I mean, the alarm people, the rest of people do. Okay, it's a very tough question. You close the window, seals, or jump your car or run like hell. In the area. I don't know. It's like a technical question. I mean, you got to help me. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chang. Perhaps the AQMD can address what's the current process on the issue of modified hydrofluoric acid.
So those are good comments, and your friend Dr. Chung Lu is the one who hired me at the district, and then Elaine Chang, your other friend, I got her job after she retired, so I know them both very well. Yeah. So your first question about PM 2.5, to date there hasn't been a lot of PM 2.5 continuous monitoring next to refineries, specifically for the refineries. I mean, Jesse talked about these instruments, and there have been some shorter-term deployments, but what's going to happen with 647 and partially AB 617 is that there will be continuous PM 2.5 monitoring either at the fence line or in community or both when it comes to, at these refineries. The details about where those monitors are to be worked out through an open community process, but there will be that continuous PM 2.5 monitoring. That's not the only pollutant that comes from these refineries that might address some of the flaring emissions and maybe some other kind of short-term emissions. We're also concerned about the VOC emissions, some of the air toxic emissions like benzene or some of the other chemicals Jesse mentioned, and then in Torrance and in Wilmington, the hydrofluoric acid issue. As we're implementing AB 1647 for refinery monitoring, both fence line and community, we've adopted our Rule 1180, which actually requires that monitoring, and we will be conducting the community monitoring. The refineries have to pay us back for that work. And as part of that, if you're using HF or modified HF, we're going to have to be monitoring for HF, both in the community and at the fence line. And pretty much all of them are going to be monitoring for PM 2.5. So we've laid that out in our Rule 1180 reports when that rule was adopted last year, and actually next month we're amending our fee rules to make sure we recover the ongoing costs of maintaining those monitors. Your second question about what happens when who does the notification. So as part of the project that Catherine was mentioning, there have been delays, and apologize for those delays, but one of the holdups was that we really want to do fence line monitoring as part of this project, and we had to convince the refinery to let us do fence line monitoring because they own the property at their fence line. We just cleared that hurdle maybe a month ago, so now we can move forward a lot faster than we had in the past. So hopefully we'll get those contracts signed and start implementing right away. But that project will allow anyone who wants to sign up to get notifications at certain levels that will be determined through the public process if things exceed a certain amount. But as a district, we don't feel comfortable issuing orders for evacuation, issuing orders to shelter in place, or giving that type of health advice. That's really up to the first responders, health departments, and those that are better equipped to make those kind of decisions, because there are risks involved with false alarms as well in terms of people running for their lives, right? So for that, most of the money went to this monitoring project. Some of the money went to the city of Torrance to enhance their alerting systems and their alarm systems. And what's going to happen is the data that's collected as part of the community and fence line monitoring system, if something does happen, it will be a huge resource in informing the fire department or public health officials whether it's appropriate to order those types of immediate actions. And we'll be part of that process to make sure that we can help interpret the data as well. But as an air quality agency with maybe one or two health experts and not a lot of first responder experts, we don't feel comfortable making that decision. That's really always been a first responder decision.
My question is, in case you notice violation, you notify fire department, how much the time required, for them to decide, in the meantime, the chemical coming, right?
Yeah.
No mercy,
Well, the idea is that the data that's collected in real time from these systems will be available to anyone in real time, including us, including the fire department, including the community. Yeah, a little bit, but it is really real time. And if something is going on, and and it's a job of the fire department, it's a job of public health officials to protect the public. It could just be the data is coming back and something's going on, or it could be an actual fire or explosion, and then they need to assess whether it's appropriate to give those types of orders. And the data is going to be very useful in determining whether it's appropriate to give those types of orders. So again, some of the details will be worked out, but we hope, as through the process Catherine mentioned with engaging the community and doing education and working with the city, that everyone will come to a system that will work for everybody.
Chief Dumaze, I don't want to put you on the spot, but would you like to jump in here, or is it not appropriate?
Dr. Klein addressed pretty much what we discussed in our meetings with the district about the big gathering and relating to the city. He's pretty much addressed the first responders are going to be there in the event that there's an incident at the refinery. So it'll be pretty much real time for us to be there. At the same time, with this data, we'll be able to help make good decisions to keep the public safe. Better than we do now, because right now, all we have is a hazard coach on the ground, and we really need somebody that's going to help us make better decisions.
What about the community alert system?
The community, what do you do? I mean, what can you do? If you come out, what do you do? Well, that's we can go, and I don't know if the assembly wants to get too deep into the NHF conversation tonight, but we line the safety systems, the notification systems that are in place, that we maintain connection with the refinery on a daily basis. The alerting system that the city has now has been, talk to folks in the community, been improved. Let's just put it that way. We're getting more information out quicker, more accurate data that's with the community, and I would encourage anybody who hasn't signed up for Torrance Alerts to do so. Assemblymembers, Mayor Suchi's bill that we're going to have to enhance our notification system to standards set forth by Assemblymember. And then there's another bill that's coming out, Senate bill coming out for the state that I just read. So there's a lot of legislation and laws that are going to help us and make us get information out quicker and into our community members and to our neighbors as well.
My question is, what can you do?
The best we can. The systems and the relationships that we have.
HF card and, I mean, what is next? I mean, what you can do, just get pay?
No, I think we have to rely on the rules and the regulations that we have in place. The AQMD is working on additional rules that'll come to a conclusion here fairly soon. It may go down the path to better safety systems within the plant, or may end up into a phase out of the chemical. That's up to recommendation of the AQMD. It's not up to the recommendation of the fire department.
All right. And I'd like to make a quick comment, too. For you residents, this is reality. I was 16 years old. Fletcher Oil Refinery across the street in Carson blew up. Okay? 3 tanks blew up, one right after the other. All 7 of my family members were burned from 1st to 3rd degree. Over 200 residents were burned or injured as a result of that explosion. Everything happened in minutes. There is no police department. There is no fire department. There are no first responders there. So here's the decision in working with Catherine, AQMD, as to what do you want to be notified. There are two things, remember right now, that I'm advising you on. There are going to be circumstances when it's an immediate life-threatening. HF is an immediate life-threatening. You will die within seconds, if not minutes, if you're exposed. So that has to be discussed and addressed when it's an immediate life-threatening. All the others, you can shelter in place, you can do all kinds of other stuff. So think in terms of two types of public safety and health warnings. What is the immediate emergency one that's life-threatening in addition to all the others?
I'm sorry. And Dr. Fine, if you want to correct me, but I know in the original proposal there was going to be certain tiers of information that would go out for an alert system. So I know no alert system is perfect, and something that kind of shook me was when I was at the park with my kids and industrial ash came raining down us. We didn't know what it was. We went home and I Googled and I found a Daily Breeze article was up telling me that it had exploded. And 10 hours after the fact, I got a reverse 911 call. So that kind of was very upsetting. So, I mean, I know no system is perfect, and we're always going to be working out kinks no matter what system is in place, but this should be a real-time alert system, at least another tool where you can sign up, get text to your phone. Fire department's got their protocol, which they do great work. So, and back to my point, sorry about that, it will be like thresholds, like, hey, like it bumped up above like a standard level of PM2.5, or this is a moderate groups are sensitive to this, or immediate life-threatening shelter in place. So you can sign up for what level of alerting you want. So.
And Dr. Fine, could you just briefly talk about the process that the AQMD is engaged in related to Rule 1410?
That's a very simple question.
I mean, just the timeline,
Yeah,
not to go too deep into the
just the timeline. As many of you know, we are working on our Rule 1410, which is looking at the two refineries that use hydrofluoric acid or modified hydrofluoric acid in their alkylation process. And our board is asked to look into potentially phasing out that program and improving safety around the use and storage and handling of that chemical. We've been probably working for over a year on some of the technical work. We've had many working group meetings, and many of the people in the room have been there. And we've had 2 refinery committee meetings. Our refinery committee is a subcommittee of our governing board. Our governing board will be the one who makes final decisions on any rule that we pass. So that subcommittee has met twice, one in January and one previous to that. I'm not remembering, maybe it might have been a little earlier than that. And so what we're doing is we have another meeting scheduled on April 28th on a Saturday. I don't have the location on me. I'm sure many people in the room do. But they're going to be meeting again for the 3rd time to look at where staff is and what staff's rule concepts might be and what staff's analysis will be, but also listen from community members on what they think should be done about this dangerous chemical. So we hope to see people out there on April 28th. And I know Assemblyman's been very involved in that, as well as other people in the room.
And Andrew, the location?
Torrance City Council Chambers. Torrance City Council Chambers, 9 a.m. on April 28th.
All right, thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
My name is Dick Almeida. I live in North Torrance. And I appreciate everybody in North Torrance. They feel that you passed. We got the Governor Brown. We appreciate that you have the bill passed. The other question I have is that I live in North Torrance. Between 6 and 7, I know you can hear the helicopter facing the refinery. I know they're looking at the smoke and the fire, but I don't hear anything about the result of what's going on or who's responsible when they get there. It seems like they get there between 6 and 7, facing the refinery. I know they're watching it smoke, the fire, but I don't remember hearing anything in the paper, anybody saying the results or who's telling them to be there. I don't know, I want to share this information.
I'm sorry, who arrives between 6 and 7?
Well, pardon me? Yeah, no, I'm talking about between 6 and 7 o'clock in the morning. Sometimes you can hear the helicopter facing the refinery.
Helicopters facing the refinery?
Yeah, right.
And your question?
I think the question is that are they monitoring fair? Are they being monitored? Are they monitored?
Does anyone know?
Does anybody know?
This is.
And I want everybody to know that there's a helicopter. You can hear it.
Maybe it's.
I was in the Army. I know. I used to
when we're local employers. I'm sorry. We'll have to look into that, Dick, and get back to you on that.
But we all appreciate what you're doing, being AB 8.7.
Well, thank you. So, bringing it back to air pollution. In Torrance, one of the biggest concerns, as Catherine has been talking about, in addition to the hydrofluoric acid, is the frequent flaring at the refinery. What are the health effects on the local community of the frequent flare?
I'll let Jesse address some of that, but okay if I take the first crack. So it really depends on the size of the flare. I think we're all familiar with those big events that occur where you see a huge amount of smoke coming out of a flare. Those are unplanned events. There's usually something that went wrong at the refinery that causes something like that. And then there's smaller events you may or may not even know about or hear about that may be below a certain threshold that are done in a semi-routine basis, although they're not allowed to do it on a routine basis. But when they're doing turnarounds, there are certain situations where a small amount of flaring is needed. So there's a wide range of different flaring events, and those you don't see. Although if there were emissions, the monitoring won't pick it up. And so we have, so the health effect is big flares. I think the biggest concern is the particulate matter. Those are very dirty flaring events. You get the black smoke, you get other types of particles coming out there, and they do, some of them, go miles and miles away because they're emitted at height, and some will affect the local community. The smaller events, they tend to be well-controlled burns. There's still emissions from those. There's sulfur dioxide emissions. There's other types of emissions from those. These are heavily regulated by the AQMD. We have our Rule 1118 that not only, and I know Jesse has issues with our rule, and he'll speak to them, I'm sure, but the notification component, where whenever they're going to do this flaring, they need to let us know, and that's publicly available information. It's not a modern, accessible type of information, and we're working to improve that. And then we recently amended 1118 to kind of crack down on the amount of flaring. So in the past, there were some limits on the amount of emissions of sulfur they can have every year, and if they went above that, there were some pretty stiff penalties. We increased those penalties, and what we asked the refineries to do is work on a plan to completely eliminate flaring to the extent possible. And they're going to be submitting those plans to us very soon, and we're going to assess those plans, and we're going to use those to come back to the rule and tighten up some of those limits, or even require some of the things that Jesse mentioned, like vapor recovery systems. Most of the refineries, at least major flares, do have vapor recovery systems. The real question is mandated or not, or are they large enough or robust enough to avoid the types of flares that Jess is concerned about. So that's an ongoing process, and it's actually going to play right into AB 617, because as we go into these community emission reduction plans, that is one of the rules we think is going to have some of that AB 617 work reflected in when we come back to 1118. So we've already set ourselves up with these refinery information that's coming in to amend that rule and further reduce flaring. We think that under 99% of the circumstances, there shouldn't be a reason for flaring at these refineries. There's always going to be those emergencies that you're just going to have that release. There's nothing you could do about it, but for most cases, there should be process changes you can make to avoid some of that flaring.
So on that point, one of the CARS slides indicated the provision AB 617 about accelerated retrofit of pollution controls on industrial facilities. Is that going to accelerate the retrofitting at the Torrance refinery?
So 1118 is very specific to the flaring, and that can satisfy some of those retrofit control technologies. We're working on another rule, 1109.1, that as our facilities exit our existing market-based control program, that they're going to be required to put on the best available controls on their technology. So just started rulemaking on that. We hope to get to that towards the end of the year. It's a very complicated rule specific to refineries, but it covers all the equipment at the refineries, with possible exception of flaring to be covered by the other rule we're working on. So, so that's another AB 617 effort because of the requirement for these best available controls.
Okay, and the issue of public health, that has been a big learning curve for us, but then again, I'm a resident, I'm a parent, and it's my neighbors and it's my family, so I look at it from a lot of other perspectives, which is what you're looking at. We have learned that, air pollution has many different kinds of components to it depending on the source, but the big category when we're talking about PM, which is your particulate matter, but your NOx and SOx fall into that category, are all your respiratory diseases. Your asthmas, your lung cancer, your emphysema, your sinusitis. So you get that big world. The next big category that's fairly well known too are your blood diseases. Then as a resident, well, we're not familiar with what a blood disease is, but your blood diseases are your leukemia, your lymphoma, your myeloma, your anemia. Those are the big blood diseases. There are over, I'd say, 50,000 now public health studies all over the world that have studied different types of public exposures to different things. So what we normally talk about is PM, and that's all you ever think about is lung cancer related to PM. But then you got to look at the other things. And the other chemicals are like your benzenes, your VOCs, your toluene, all these other categories that are your blood disease chemicals. But then research has also shown other things. Women that are pregnant, the prenatal impacts exposure to toxic chemicals of all categories can have permanent injury to children. Low birth weight, they can have neurological damage, you can have physiological growth development problems. Well, you don't read a lot about that, but that is a category. Obesity, they've already shown people that live in high polluted areas have a higher incidence of obesity. Diabetes. Communities that have high incidence of diabetes also have higher rates of air pollution. What we need is that for our medical profession, our scientists and public health departments to acknowledge to the public these are all the realities of public health impacts. And we as communities, if we live by a refinery and we know that, during the course of a flare event, these are being released, we have a right to know, as part of that reporting, what we're being exposed to. I'll give you a good example. Parents rush their 2 children, emergency treatment, asthma attack. So they're being treated for asthma. Inhaler, stay overnight, at least the next day. But what the doctors, hospitals, and nurses did not know that day, that night, was that sulfuric acid was also released, or hydrogen sulfide was also released. So if there's another chemical released, and the hospital nurses and doctors don't know that, they're not examining for you for that. If you've been exposed to benzenes and other chemicals, they need to take a urine test as one, or a blood test. So if you didn't have a urine test or blood test done, they have no clue you've been exposed to something else. So therefore, they're not examining you for that. They're not treating for you that. So these chemicals have long-term impacts because it becomes a biological cumulative effect. So you may be okay this year, next year, and all of a sudden 5 years later, boom, it kicks in. 10 years later, it kicks in, and you don't know why. So the right to public information, the right to know what you're exposed to and the quantity you're exposed to is very important as part of this reporting process. So again, when you're working on 617 and you're putting your Canadian plan and you want to get reports, you just don't want to be alerted. You want to know what you're exposed to and the quantity, and that all your doctors, nurses, clinics, emergency facilities know that at the exact same time.
Thank you.
I just want to add to Jesse's list that cardiovascular effects, so heart and circulatory system, are one of the major impacts of particulate matter that we know about. I think you touched on, but neurological effects are another thing that has been a little bit more of a recent finding.
Thank you. Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
I spelled out Stan. This one is directed to you, Dr. Fine. My name is Roland Housen. I go here actually, and I work here as well. I live in North Torrance, so I'm very concerned about modified hydrofluoric acid. So do you, Dr. Fine, and the South Coast AQMD endorse a phasing out of MHF? Because when I see only us and Wilmington Valero use it, so I don't think that refineries really need to use MHF if only for about the two in California that use that.
Well, that's a decision for our board to make. There's a lot of factors. If it were going to be phased out from whatever place, it's a very expensive proposition for the refineries. Whether you use their numbers or numbers we're working on it, in any case, it's going to be expensive. So there's a lot of things to consider, and we're giving all that information to our governing board, our refinery committee, to help who's going to make that ultimate decision. So we don't know where that's going to go. All we can do as staff is do all the analysis, get all the information out there, hear from the public, and then our board make a decision, just like they make those decisions on all our rules. So, from a staff perspective, there is a level of concern, obviously. It's a very dangerous chemical if it's released, and we are looking at different concepts that we either phase it out eventually or make it pretty much almost no risk issue. We're not sure that's even possible, so we are, we're still doing some analysis, and we're going to look for feedback from our board, from our refinery committee, April 28th, about whether we should, which direction we should go and start developing rule language.
I want to thank you very much for standing up and sharing your concern about it. I just want to add that, obviously this has been a huge issue, particularly in the Torrance community. Last year, I introduced a bill to try to ban the hydrofluoric acid, but it's been held in the legislature in the face of tremendous opposition, not only from the oil industry, but also from a lot of the workers that are concerned about losing their jobs at the refinery. And so, it's a big issue, but I think it's going to come down. At this point, the focus is on the AQMD. They are deliberating now. They have the scientists and the refinery experts to the expertise to be able to try to strike that balancing act of addressing the safety issues surrounding hydrofluoric acid while at the same time trying to keep the refinery operating, because that would be a huge impact on hundreds of people's jobs as well as on the overall economy. So it's a very delicate balance that the AQMD is trying to strike, but we are focusing on the AQMD's work at this point.
Yeah. One question, there's a two chemicals used for the catalyst for the alkylation. One is HF, one is sulfuric acid, right? Of course, it's very expensive to switch the HF to sulfuric acid. We got to consider people's life. How much life worth? You know, you say, oh, this will cost you 10 million, a billion or something. But life is more important. 100 people killed. Then what? Right? So you have to consider, you got to conduct a study with outside contractor, study detail. So their conclusion, only two chemicals, one is HF, one is sulfuric acid. So can you comment that the possibility to switch to sulfuric acid?
I don't want to go too much into the hydrofluoric acid, but Dr. Fine, if you feel comfortable in addressing it.
Just real quickly, it hasn't been done before, a switch from HF to sulfuric, but it can't be done. There will be impacts to refinery in terms of cost, but also having to shut down for a considerable period of time to do the switch over. The health impacts of being exposed to HF are different than the health impacts of being exposed to sulfuric acid. It's not just the acid component of hydrofluoric acid. There's other toxic effects there that are of deep concern, as well as its ability to form what we call a dead vapor cloud. It has a boiling point around room temperature, so it quickly can move between a liquid and a gas, which keeps it more compact. It doesn't dissipate as fast as it would if it was sulfuric acid, which has a very high boiling point. So there's obviously a lot of factors. I don't want to get into all the details now, but your comment that human life costs and that human life should be put first is something our committee has heard loud and clear from community members in the last two meetings we had.
All right. I think we need to wrap up. Are there any comments?
I just want to say one thing. I'm concerned about hydrofluoric acid. Well, I'm on the 1410 working group, and they're working hard on it. But in the interim, that will be monitored on the new monitoring project. So unless something, so it's still in. So if you sign up, once it's in, they will have fence line monitoring for hydrofluoric acid, so you can get immediate alert. Don't know if it'll save us, but you could close your windows and hope for the best.
Any concluding remarks from any of our other panelists?
In case everyone doesn't know, there is an actual dollar amount, a government number, as to how much you and I are worth. It's $7 million at our price tag, that of our value. So when it went up, okay, $9 million now.
I just wanted to thank everyone for coming out tonight, because really the essence of AB 617 is getting out into the communities themselves, understanding what the issues are, and then having the partnerships on what the solutions are. And I know Catherine mentioned having a technical advisory committee for her project, and that's really a model that we're looking at as part of 617, is that whether it's monitoring or the community reduction plans, that it's done in partnership with a community committee that brings everybody together. So again, thank you for coming out tonight.
Assemblyman, I want to thank you for your leadership on AB 617 and other pieces of legislation, inviting us down here. It's a really special opportunity when we get to come to a community, particularly with a host who's a member of the legislature and has an intimate relationship with piece of legislation. So I really appreciate that. I want to thank you all for your time here. I echo the comments of my colleague Karen and Dr. Fine, and I appreciate your time, and I again want to encourage you to continue to be involved in the implementation. And then one last plug for the grant program. If you go to our website, and the deadline again is April 19th, which is 1 week from today.
All right.
I did most of the talking, so I'll be brief, but I did want to thank everyone who came out, and the Assemblyman for inviting us and his work on 617, but especially on 1647, which really helped us pass our rule to get this refinery monitoring out there and to cover the costs, which was incredibly helpful to us as we were working on that rule.
Yeah, in fact, I wanted to ask you, when you said that you were having a hard time getting the permission of the refinery, my bill was supposed to require that they install the monitors, and I was wondering about that. We can talk about that later, but I appreciate your comments. Okay. Well, thank you so much to the California Air Resources Board and the Air Quality Management District, Jesse Marquez, Catherine Lays with Flair. I think the overall message is that at the statewide level, with our local regulators and with our grassroots organizations, we're all trying to work together to address the very real threat of air pollution in our communities, in our neighborhoods. And so I look forward to working with everyone. I especially appreciate the grassroots activists who are reminding me and reminding all of us about the urgency that this is not just just about getting the grants out there, but it's about lives and health and children and families. And so thank you very much, especially to Jesse and Catherine for sharing your frontline experiences working in our communities. And thank you very much to everyone for coming out. Thank you to El Camino College again for hosting today's event. And with that, have a safe drive home. Thank you very much.